Hello everyone, what's up? It's me again, Jackmonster3, and finally it's time to talk about the movies that I watched during the Horrorthon over the month of October. There's a few rewatches in here as well that I usually watch during this time, so I'm not gonna like talk too much about those films. But yeah, I'm gonna go through them like each day that I watch them and like pretty much like in chronological order as to when I watched them, and then I am finally going to say which ones were the best ones that I watched for the first time, like the top five, if you will. So you can say this is like a horrorthon video and the top five of the month of October. So yeah, so basically only horror films. So the first film I watched was the film called The Plague of the Zombies from 1966. This is a Hammer film which was released around the same time as the film called The Reptile, which was made probably like around the same, like actually I think it used the same set as the other one. But I think Plague of the Zombies was a much better film, and yeah, I mean the zombies are a little bit weird in this film. They act really strange, and you don't really see that very often in films like this. So at least they tried something different, but that kind of like felt like a little bit off-putting to my for my liking. But I mean, Plague of the Zombies is still a good film, so yeah, I gave it a 6 out of 10. Then I watched Scars of Dracula, which was surprisingly very entertaining. I mean, I think I've heard from many people that these films tend to be like going downhill really fast. Um, and I thought this was one of the better ones in this entire series, along with the first one, or like the 58 one with Vincent Price and Peter Cushing. Now, this one I don't believe had Peter Cushing, or did it have that? I'm just going to double check on that. I think this one did not have Peter Cushing in it. No, it didn't, but it had, of course, Christopher Lee as the Count. I think this is really atmospheric and really fun. Really great sets, really looking cool looking locations or whatever as well. Really eerie music, and yeah, one of the better like Dracula films in my personal opinion. At least they like in this series or like in this franchise. So yeah, Scars of Dracula. Gave that an 8 out of 10. Then I watched a film called Playgirl Killer from 1967. Now the main reason why I watched this one was because I thought this was like seen as one of the very first slasher films, if you can even call it that, in the U.S. And sadly, I was left disappointed. There's a really cool looking like kill like in the opening scene, which involves like a bow and arrow. And I thought that was really cool and really clever. I'm like, oh, this looks really good for being like a '60s film. Like it comes like slasher films in general, but then it just goes downhill and it's just so boring and dull, and most of the characters are just really forgettable. So that's really unfortunate. So I gave that a 3 out of 10. Then I watched a film that this one really surprised me. I thought I went into this with really low expectations. I thought this was going to be really terrible because this is a made-for-TV film and it's a very late one in that entry, like for a made-for-TV film. So this was made in 2013, and it's the film called Scarecrow, which has to be one of the most stupid titles I've ever heard because I mean, that sounds okay if have to be really honest, but then again, there's at least maybe three or four other films with that exact same name. But this was surprisingly entertaining for what it was. I mean, of course, it felt like they actually knew that they didn't really have a whole lot of to work with, but they still were able to make it somewhat interesting and somewhat entertaining. So yeah, Scarecrow, I gave a 6 out of 10. Now we come to a film which I thought was just so extremely overrated, um, and it's the film called The Autopsy of Jane Doe. I expected this to be a really eerie, creepy type of like, almost like not a creature feature, but sort of like a really eerie and creepy, like atmospheric horror film. But it went into the same direction that I feared, and it just went into the whole demonic ghost possession films that I've just been so tired of, like those that came out like during like 2010s and whatever. And it's such a shame because it had a really great, nice little build up to it, and then like after 25 or 30 minutes, I was just like, oh come on, you're going into this direction right now. Yeah, that's really unfortunate. I think this film is so overrated in my personal opinion. I gave this a 4 out of 10. But yeah, now the next film is not really a great film or anything like that. I mean, it's a pretty stupid and pretty bad film if I have to be honest. But this at least has enough charm to it that you kind of laugh at it at this point. And it's the film called Devilfish from 1984. I think this is also known as Monster Shark or something. But this is directed by Lamberto Bava. from 1984, and yeah, like I said before, it's not a good film, but it's a fun film to have a laugh at, and it's pretty fun actually because it's unintentionally funny, I would say. So yeah, Devilfish, I gave a 5 out of 10. Then we have a film called Eye of the Cat from 1969, which I also thought was pretty fun. Once again, this is a film that feels very serious, but at the same time, I'm not really sure if it was meant to be like funny because there's so many scenes in this that really cracked me up as well. Maybe it's just the fact that I have a really dark sense of humor that made me really laugh at this. But yeah, it's pretty fun, and I don't really hear a whole lot of people talk about it in general. So yeah, Eye of the Cat from 1969. And let's see here then at number 8, not number 8, but I'm talking about the 8th film that I watched. The film called Tales That Witness Madness from 1973. And this is an anthology film that you can probably tell by based on the title. And I would say half of the stories are good and half of them are forgettable. If I do remember correctly, there's 4 stories to this one. If you also include the wraparound story, it's like 5, I believe. But 2 of the stories were really, really entertaining, and 2 of them were just so forgettable. And the wraparound story is actually quite decent. So I gave this a 6 out of 10. And then we have a film which also is, once again, falls in the same category as Monster Shark or Devilfish. Full Moon production, a film called Seed People from 1992. It's full moon garbage. Sometimes it's really fun garbage, and sometimes it's just really bad garbage. In this case, it was really fun garbage, in my personal opinion. I gave it a 5 out of 10. And yeah, if you do like full moon films in general, if you want to see something that is somewhat entertaining, watch Seed People. Now, the next one I've watched, I believe, is probably one of the best ones I've watched during this entire month, to be honest. And it's the film called Freaks, the classic one from 1932. I kept thinking, like, is this really a horror film? Because this is way more of a really dark and really sad kind of like a drama film than a straightforward horror film. I think it's just categorized as a horror film just because all of these people that were involved in the project or like in this film. But yeah, I've already made a review of this one, so if you want to look into that review or like if you want to know more about it, check out my review. I'm just gonna say nothing else than that, but yeah, Freaks, I gave this a 9 out of 10. Then we have a film. This has to be one of the biggest letdowns in quite a while, I must say. So this is a film that I was just craving to watch this film. I was just constantly waiting for like a Swedish release of this one, and then it got released, and I picked it up almost immediately, and damn, I was disappointed. And it's the film called Mad God by Phil Tippett, who is a great, great special effects artist. I think, I mean, nothing wrong with that. I think the movie looks absolutely amazing, and the whole like stop motion effects and all that, you can pretty much tell that they've put a whole lot of effort into this project. Now, the major issue with this film is that there's basically no storyline at all. It's just almost like a showcase of, oh, look what I can make with all of these effects. So I just wish Phil Tippett could have like stuck to it with some really like talented director, and then make the effects for that particular film instead of directing the film, because apparently he's not a very good director, because he also directed that terrible Starship Troopers 2, which was just absolutely atrocious. That's the weakest one in that entire series, in my personal opinion, even including like the animated films or whatever. But yeah, that one was seriously really, really bad. And this one, I wouldn't say is as bad as that film. But like I said, there's basically no storyline whatsoever. It's just like a weird big showcase of great looking like practical or like stop motion effects. So yeah, a 5 out of 10 for that one. And then I watched Dear Dead Delilah from 1972, which is another one which is kind of like a mediocre type film. I thought it was just kind of boring. I mean, there's some really interesting kills every now and then. I mean, especially for like an early 70s horror film. But I think overall it's a sort of like a weird thing when it comes to this, because the main character turns out not to be the main character, which is really strange. But if you've seen the film, you probably know what I'm trying to tell you. But yeah, Dear Dead Delilah from 1972, I gave that a 5 out of 10 at best. So yeah. Then we have a slasher film, if you can even call it a slasher film, because you probably pretty much know from the get-go who the killer is. And yeah, it's the film called Torment from 1986. Now, this one was one of the very last, or like one of the very few slasher films from the 80s that I had not seen up until recently. and I think this is pretty good. I mean, I would say it has a whole lot of similarities with Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. I'm not saying like it's the same type of tone to it, but I would say the killer is similar to the whole style to this film, if that even makes sense, because it's almost more like a character study with this guy more than like the actual killing or like the death scenes. So that's the reason why I can barely even call it a slasher film. But I know it's been like shoved into that category, so that's the reason why I called it a slasher film. So yeah, but anyway, Torment from 1986, I gave it a 6 out of 10. And then I watched yet another one of these, Dracula AD 1972, which I think is yet another good Dracula film, but I wouldn't say it's as good as Scars of Dracula. Um, the major issue I have with this one, I mean, it's really great to see both Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in this one, but I think it's really strange that this takes place in 1972. Not bashing on it, because it's a pretty interesting idea. Like, the concept is pretty good, but that really threw me off in the first 30 minutes or so. I just couldn't get into it, but then after a while, like, oh, it's still fine. So yeah, I gave that a 6, not 6, but a 7 out of 10. Now the next one is a film which I believe was one of the very first films that Linnea Quigley appeared in, and it's the film called Don't Go Near the Park. If you don't count that Psycho from Texas, which I think came out like in the early 70s, maybe mid 70s, maybe, I'm not really sure. But yeah, this is the film Don't Go Near the Dog from 1979, and I think this has almost no structure to it at all. It's so weird and confusing, and I didn't really know what to think about the film, to be honest. There's some interesting visuals and pretty interesting effects every now and then, and once again, I think the storyline is what really suffers here, because it's just so lots of nonsense going on that you don't really care for too much, which is really unfortunate. But yeah, that's a 4 out of 10 for me. Um, then I watched a film called Dr. Caligari from 1989, which is sort of like a goofy type of almost remake of the original one from the 20s. And this is not a very good film, because I didn't really like the humor, even though I'm probably pretty much like a person that really likes dark humor usually. But this one just felt like it really tried desperately, so desperately to be funny, that to the point that it just failed. So this was not really my type of humor, this film. Maybe I'm just in the minority, I'm not really sure. Maybe this is a film I need to rewatch. But the entire set as well looks like it was made like in some kids show like set or whatever from the 80s. It doesn't even look like it's a set made for a horror film. It's just like, oh, let's make a horror film within this like kid set, or like this is for a kids show. Yeah, I did not like this one bit. 3 out of 10. Then I watched yet another one from 1989. It's a film called Hellgate, from 89 as well. Once again, it's another film that starts off really, really well, but somewhere around the halfway point, you get tired of it, and the characters aren't really that well written, in my opinion. And usually, I'm one of those people that really like some of these really cheesy and stupid 80s horror films in general, but this is one of these films that I just couldn't get into it for some reason. So yeah, Hellgate, number what I'm talking about. Hellgate 1989, 4 out of 10. That's what I want to say. Now let's see here. Then the next one I watched was Bad Ronald, which I've already made a review of, which I really, really enjoyed. I gave that a 9 out of 10. And then we have the film called Vampyr, Vampyr, if you want to know how it spells, not the typical way you spell vampire. Great visuals, entertaining film for what it is. It's from the 30s. It's a 7 out of 10. And then I watched The Others from 2001. This is a great example as to how you make a ghost or like demon type of film. Unlike the ones that came out like in the 2010s that I have constantly criticized, this is how you make a good film like that. So yeah, The Others, amazing film, enough said. So yeah, 8 out of 10 for that one. Then I went into some shot on video films. They shot on video film called Dead North from 1991. This was so bad, and it was almost a 1 out of 10. The main reason why I didn't give it a 1 out of 10 was because of some of the kills that were quite funny and stupid, and the fact that most of the film takes place outside of in the woods. But the problem is, for the first half of the film, they haven't even gotten into the woods yet, and they just like at someone's home just partying, and you don't care about that, and it just almost runs for 2 hours. and it's just way too long for a film like this. A short on video film should not be longer than maybe 1 hour and 25 minutes tops, if you, even that, in my personal opinion. But yeah, Dead North, cannot recommend this one at all. So yeah, 2 out of 10. Then I watched a film called Severe Injuries from 2003. I'm not sure if this was shot on video. It has that feel to it, but I'm not completely sure. But the concept for this is really fun. It's basically about this guy who has like inherited this whole thing that his entire like family has been like serial killers, and he has to top the previous, like his father and his father before him, in terms of like kill count or whatever. It's a nice concept on paper, but it doesn't really execute it very well in my personal opinion. And I would say it takes a while before it gets going, really. But the last half of the film is actually really, really fun and really entertaining for what it is. So if you do stuck with this film, if you stick with this film for at least more than 30 minutes, you're gonna have a whole lot of fun in the last 30 minutes, if you get what I mean. So yeah, Severe Injuries, I gave that a 5 out of 10. Then we have yet another disappointment, a film called The Terror from 1963. Shockingly directed by Roger Corman and Francis Ford Coppola, believe it or not. But this one has Boris Karloff and Jack Nicholson in it. Boris Karloff has almost nothing to do. He's just wandering around in his bathrobe or whatever that was supposed to look like. And Jack Nicholson, I'm shocked to say this, but his acting in this one I thought was really, really bad. But yeah, I'm just glad that he moved on to bigger and better projects after a while. So yeah, The Terror, I gave that a 4 out of 10. And then I watched a film by Roman Polanski. I'm not going to say anything else about him because we already know the background to like that guy. But Repulsion from 1965. Very interesting film. I would say this is a little bit overrated in my personal opinion, but it's a really nice little film. It almost has like a weird Andrei Tarkovsky feel to it, mixed with a little bit of Cronenberg as well. I know that's a really strange comparison, but that's just how I would describe the film. But yeah, Repulsion, I gave that a 7 out of 10. And then we have a film which was just so weird. It turns out, I mean, in the beginning, like in the first 30 minutes, it seems like your typical type of almost like romance drama film. And then it just gets weirder and weirder and crazier and crazier. And the film is called Ghost Nursing from 1982. And this is one of those Hong Kong productions. And yeah, I thought this was really fun and really entertaining for what it was. So I gave it a 7 out of 10. And then I watched a film with Bela Lugosi called The Return of the Vampire, which is sort of like I think was meant to be like some sort of sequel to the original Dracula, or like the Dracula from 31 with Bela Lugosi himself as well. For some weird reason, he's not called Dracula in this one. He's called something else. I'm not sure why. I think it was something with like the copyright or like the rights or something to the name or something. They couldn't do that, so that's why they ended up with this instead. It's a good film. It's nowhere near as good as 31 Dracula one bit, but it's still a fun little film in general. So I gave it a 6 out of 10. And then I watched the film called My Demon Lover from 1987. This is way more of a comedy film than a straightforward horror film, even though it has some horror elements to it. This is a really charming and funny film. I mean, the concept shouldn't work if you just like read about the concept, but in some weird way it does work in this film. Maybe it's just because it was made in the 80s. If it was made in like in the 90s or 70s, it wouldn't have worked. Maybe that's the reason why. Great soundtrack, really funny characters, and really, really fun dialogue as well, I would say. And yeah, I can really, really recommend this one if you haven't seen this one, if you like more of the comedy type of style of horror. So yeah, My Demon Lover from 1987, gave it a 7 out of 10. And then a film that I made a review of, which I thought was absolutely horrendous. It was included in one of those Vinegar Syndrome box sets. Usually they release almost like impossible films to get a hold of. This one was included along with Winter Beast and what was the other film called? Winter Beast and From Beyond the Door or Beyond Dreams Door or something, which I have yet to see actually. But this one was Fatal Exam from 1990, which was apparently the project started in 1985, but it wasn't completed up until 1990. And they should have just left it like right there. I've already made a review of this one, bashing the hell out of this film. So if you want to see that, go check that review out. So Yeah, 1 out of 10. Then I rewatched because my friend had not seen the previous two in this series, and we thought, well, we might as well watch the first two before seeing the third one in theaters. So this was a rewatch for me, obviously. The first Terrifier. I've grown to appreciate this more than I did previous time. Uh, Even though I only gave this a 6 out of 10, it's still a really, really strong 6 at that because it's something about this second film. Like, the second film made me enjoy the first film even more now when I watched the second one as well and the third one. So, yeah, I mean, some of the characters not really like memorable at all. It's mainly like Artie Clown himself that is really the star of this first film, in my personal opinion. And of course, some of the kills are they're really brutal and really entertaining. So, also, I think the issue with this film, you can clearly tell that this has had a much lower budget because most of the film takes place like inside of this building. But I mean, for what they had, like budget wise, I think they did an amazing job. So, 6 out of 10, but like a really strong 6 at that. Then I watched a film called Silent Predators, which was like a made for TV film from the late 90s. And this is a killer snake film, like about venomous snakes, like terrorizing this small village or this town. And it's basically up to like the new sheriff in town, not sheriff, but the new, I think he's supposed to be a firefighter. So he's basically up to him and some other people in the town to try to get rid of the snakes, basically. So it's your typical made for TV type of garbage type of film. It's fun for what it is, but it's nothing that I would like desperately seek out or anything like that. But it's still a fun little film, so 5 out of 10 for that one. And then we have a film which I've actually not seen the previous ones in quite a while, but I decided to finally watch Yuan the Grudge 2, which is like the original Japanese one, if you will. Um, Not as good as the first one, or like if you can even call it the first one, because there were at least one or two made for TV films made before the original ones, if you get what I mean. And then Ju-on the Grudge was released, and then Ju-on the Grudge 2, which was the one that I watched. Not as good as the first one. I think the major issue with this one is that it kind of jumps back and forth a little bit because it's basically like following different types of characters throughout like these number of events in the film, or like these like crazy things going on with this ghost or like this demon, Kayoko, I believe her name is Kayoko. I can be totally wrong about that, but overall, though, I think this is a really great film, and I just think that this genre was really at its best during like the late '90s, early 2000s. Now it feels a little bit tiresome, if in my personal opinion. So yeah, I gave that a 7 out of 10. And then we have a film. This is probably the oldest film that I've watched this time around, and it's the Swedish Danish co-production film, the film called Hexan or Haxan, which most other people tend to pronounce it, which pretty much like translates into like The Witch, but you probably know what film I'm referring to. It's the film by Benjamin Christensen, and this is a really fascinating film because it's such an early like type of horror film, but I wouldn't really necessarily call it a horror film because it's a really strange vibe when it comes to like there's like a mix between like a somewhat of a narrative, and then you kind of mix that with almost like a documentary style type of filmmaking in this one. So that's also a little bit of the issue with the film, because I think after a while it gets a little bit tiresome, like, oh, witches are bad and the devil and Lord Satan, that is bad. They kept doing that like throughout the entire film, and I thought that was a little bit tiresome after a while. But overall, though, I think this is a really good film, so 7 out of 10. Then I watched I think you could call this a kaiju film, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms from 1953. Uh, Giant lizard terrorizing a town or like a city. You get what you get when it comes to these films. It's a fun for what it is. It's a 6 out of 10. But I mean, I really like the stop motion or like the practical stuff. Of course, made greatly by the amazing Ray Harryhausen. Always have a hard time trying to pronounce his name for some weird reason, but I gave this a 6 out of 10. And then we have a film which I think once when this was released on the Trauma DVDs back in the day, I think Lloyd Kaufman himself said that this was the very worst film that they ever released, or like that Troma ever released under their label. And I don't really agree with that, because there's at least some other films that I would say that are way worse than this, but this is still not a very good film. The Curse of the Screaming Dead, also known as what's it called, the Cannibal Confederates, I believe. The Cannibal Confederates, something like that. You probably know what film I'm referring to, but it's from 1982, and this is sort of like a weird remake of the director's other film, which was made in the previous year, which I have, the Dead of, what's it called, Night of Terror, I believe, which I have pretty much like described as the 80s version of Manos, The Hands of Fate. Take that information how you like to. But anyway, The Curse of the Screaming Dead, terrible dialogue, terrible effects, really terrible lighting and camera work and almost everything. But it still has fun, cheesy, stupid trash shoved into it, so it's a 4 out of 10 for me. And then we have a film which was another one which was included in one of those Vinegar Syndrome box sets that I bought, and this was the film that I was thinking this was probably a film that was never released on. I don't even think this was released on VHS, to be honest. But this was like sort of like a slasher film called Hanging Heart from 1989. But I think this was. I think the production began like earlier, like in the 80s, maybe like 83 or something, and then it wasn't completed, or it wasn't released until 1986 or 89, I believe. It's really strange when it comes to the years with this one, but Hanging Heart, I would say, is a very weak slasher film. There's too much. How can I say this without being like offensive? It's way too much homoerotic type of material shoved into this film for my liking. But yeah, Hanging Heart. Yeah, I didn't care too much for that one. I do like the soundtrack though. I thought the soundtrack was really cool. So 4 out of 10. And then we have a film which is just so extremely crazy. It's the film called Wolf Devil Woman, which is also known as The Wolf and Queen, I believe. This feels like a Godfrey Ho film. I can almost guarantee that this is a Godfrey Ho film, but it's credited as someone else directing it. Crazy, crazy film with lots of, I assume, spliced footage shoved into one film. And the wolves in this film, they look like German shepherds. I actually do believe they were German shepherds that they used for the film. And silly looking effects and storyline that doesn't make sense, but man, it's a really fun film. So yeah, 7 out of 10 for that one. Then I watched The Oblong Box from 1969 with Vincent Price. It's good for what it is. It's a 6 out of 10. I'm actually going to start to try to speed up a little bit because I still have plenty of films to go through. Then we have a film called Willow Creek from 2013, which I've already made a review of. So if you want to look more into this film, go check out my review for it. I thought it was pretty underrated and pretty fun. And then we have a film called Southern Gothic from 2007. Pretty forgettable vampire film, even though some of the vampires look cool and the practical effects look cool. The storyline is just a big mess, in my personal opinion, which is really a shame. And the only actor that put out some sort of effort into this project, I would say, was William Forsythe. The rest of the acting was pretty bad. But yeah, Southern Gothic, a number of 4 out of 10. Damn. Then we have the film called Stitches. Not the Stitches with the clown. This is the Stitches made by Full Moon from the early 2000s. Really forgettable film. I can barely remember anything about it. It's that forgettable. It's a 3 out of 10. Then this was the another rewatch that I mentioned before, Terrifier 2. Much better than the first one. And yeah, I think the characters in this one, they are much more likable and much more entertaining, and the whole backstory, and not backstory, but the entire storyline, I would say, is much better than the previous one. And I mean, you mainly watch these Terrifier films not so much because of the story, but more because of the gore and the blood effects. And I really liked the main character, like Sienna. I thought she was amazing, and she's probably one of the best final girls in the later, like in this past decade, or decades, if you will. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. 7 out of 10. Yeah. Then we have a film called Nurse Sherry, which is directed by Al Adamson. This came out in 1977. This is a film that is pretty darn bad, but in some weird way, I found it to be very fascinating, mainly because of the camera work and the lighting and the weird editing and the soundtrack. The soundtrack is actually really, really good, and like the score. I felt like the score probably should have been in a better film, but yeah, that's what you get sometimes. I gave that a 5 out of 10. And we'll continue with a 5 out of 10s for the next one. The next one was the film called Grave Robbers from 1988, not to be confused with the Mexican film called Grave Robbers, which I believe came out like 1 year after this one. So these films have nothing to do with one another, but this one I think was very bland, very kind of forgettable. I gave this a 5 out of 10, but that's mainly because of the first half of the film. The last half of the film was just so forgettable and tiresome, so yeah, that's really unfortunate. Then I watched the German film called German. I believe this was an Austrian film, but yeah, it's German language, so yeah. And it's the film called Hagasusa from 2017, and this is one of those like folk horror artsy films that I just don't care too much about. I've come to the conclusion that I don't really care too much for folk horror in general. Um, Great visuals. I mean, this was basically like a student project made by this director. And in that regard, I have to say that it's a really well made film. It looks amazing, and the cinematography is amazing. The atmosphere is really great. But once again, this is one of those films that the storyline does not make any sense at all to me, and it's very difficult to follow. So yeah, that's really unfortunate. So I gave this a 4 out of 10. Then we have a film which, once again, this is a full moon film, and it's the film called The Dead and Rotting from 2002. This is entertaining garbage for what it is. It's a 5 out of 10. I'm just going to leave it at that. And then the next one I watched was a film called Victims from 1985, directed by Jeff Hathcock, and this is one of the weakest films I watched during this entire month. To be honest, I gave this a 2 out of 10. Just so boring and so forgettable, and annoying score and almost everything. So yeah. Then we have a found footage film called As Above, So Below. One of the better found footage films, I would say. I'm not too much of a fan of that genre, but once they do succeed with a good one, I think they're really, really good. I gave this a 7 out of 10. Really great premise as well. It takes place like in the catacombs, and its found footage style. I thought that was really clever and really unique. And it also does make sense because they can't really escape this place because they're pretty much like mazes underneath this and like in the catacombs, and that ties in with the fact that why the Blair Witch Project worked really well, because they were like stuck in the woods and they were like lost. It's very similar to this one based on the whole fact that they're stuck in some location that they can't get out. Unlike Paranormal Activity, when they're inside of this house and like, oh no, there's a ghost or like a demon in here. What should we do? Well, just leave. Go to the neighbor's house, or like just move out of this neighborhood or like this suburban like community and just go to another city. Damn it. But yeah, As Above, So Below, I gave a 7 out of 10. Now let's see here. Then I watched I think this is a French film, trying to be American slasher film. This is a film called Within the Woods. Not too much happens in the woods. Most of the film takes place inside of this castle, and it's really boring, and the characters are annoying. None of the characters are likable. There's almost no blood or gore effects in sight that you care about. None of the characters are likable, like I said before. The music is really annoying, and it's played really seriously, which is really puts me off as well. Yeah, this tried so desperately to be an American slasher film, but it just failed in my personal opinion. So I give this a 3 out of 10. Then I watched the film called The Last Showing from 2014 with Robert Englund. I've already made a review of this one, so if you want to know more about that, check that review out. Then I watched Flesh Eaters from Outer Space. This is the prime example as to when people that made this film know what they were what they were making. It's not a good film, but it feels like the filmmakers knew that, and they did the best for what they could with the things they had. and it's a really fun film actually. I mean, really nice blend of comedy and horror, and really funny like effects. This is a film you need to watch like with a couple of friends and just have a laugh at, because I mean it's that fun in my personal opinion. So yeah, 6 out of 10 for that one. That's from 1989. So if you want to know more about that, so yeah. But then I watched a film called Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory from 1961. Pretty fun, nice little atmospheric who done it type of deal. Instead of like a typical killer, you have this werewolf, and these people in this community needs to figure out who the werewolf is. So it's not very much focused on like the death scenes themselves. It's more like the mystery type of deal when it comes to this one. But yeah, I enjoyed this for what it was. So 6 out of 10. Now the next film made absolutely no sense at all, and I have no idea how this got made, but it did get made, and it's directed by James Glickenhaus, who've made much better films like Shakedown and The Exterminator and films like that. But it's the film called The Astrologer from 1975. I wish I could tell you anything about this film, but it's that confusing that I just couldn't figure it out at all. But yeah, it's a 4 out of 10, which is really unfortunate. Then we have the film called Too Beautiful to Die, which is more of a slasher film than a straightforward giallo film, but it has a little bit of a giallo feel to it as well. It does remind me a little bit of Murder Rock by Lucio Fulci to a certain degree. So if you do like that one, you might like this one as well. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it. This is pretty much like a weird. I assume this is like more like a standalone sequel to a film called Nothing Underneath, which came out like a couple of years prior to this, which I didn't care too much for, or at least I don't remember too much about that film because I have not seen that film in maybe 12 years. But this one was really fun, and the soundtrack is so great in this one. And yeah, if you do like slashers or giallo films in general, go check this one out. This was really, really fun. 6 out of 10. And then I watched Terrifier 3, and most people have probably already discussed this film. I think this is the best one in the series so far. I would say not by much. I think this is a little bit better than Terrifier 2, but not by much. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I think it's really entertaining and fun, like slasher film, sort of like a throwback film. I mean, all of these Terrifier films really reminds me of some of those older, old school like slasher films from the 80s, which I really, really enjoy in general. So I gave that an 8 out of 10. And then this one was probably the weakest one I watched this entire Horrorthon as well. Electric Zombies from 2006. This is shockingly bad. I don't really know what else to say about it. Nothing is good about this film. Let's just move on. Then we have yet another film that I was disappointed on, and it's the film called The Occultist from 1988, directed by Tim Kincaid, who also made Breeders, which I didn't care too much about either, but I still say Breeders is much more fun than this one, because Breeders at least had some really sleazy and funny looking like effects as well. So yeah, The Occultist, 3 out of 10. Then I rewatched Night of the Demons. I've already seen this film so many times. I've discussed it so often, so I don't really need anything else to say about it. Then I watched The Grudge 3. Now at this point the series had really started to struggle, because this was the last one they made, in at least in the American community, if you don't count that newer Grudge film that came out like 3 or 4 years ago, which I have no idea if that was supposed to be a remake or reboot. I've heard so many different things about that one. I've mainly heard bad things about that one, but this one is, I mean, it's not terrible, but it's not great either. It's just a very, very forgettable film in general, I would say. So yeah, The Grudge 3, I would say, is a 5 out of 10, but a very forgettable one in general. Then I rewatched Fright Night, the original one. Of course, I don't even want to watch the remake because I'm such a big fan of the original one. So yeah. Then I watched a film called Halloween Party. Once again, a film that starts with a very interesting premise and then completely fails around the halfway mark. Yeah, which is really unfortunate. It's okay for what it is, but it's not something that I will immediately seek out anytime soon. But yeah, Halloween Party, it's a 5 out of 10. Then I watched for the very first time, believe it or not, David Cronenberg's Shivers from 1975. I believe this is one of the very first films he ever directed, if you don't count the Crimes of the Future short film. I believe it was just a little bit over an hour long, I believe, that film, which I have yet to see as well. But this one is your typical type of Cronenberg. If you like some of his other films, you probably know what you're getting yourself into. Fun looking effects, really cool looking creatures as well. They almost look like small little like chunks of meat going around like trying to eat people. I thought that was really fun. But yeah, Shivers, I give a 7 out of 10. Really entertaining and really seasoned. It has a very special type of atmosphere to it as well, so I really like that. So yeah. And then the last film I watched for the Horrorthon was the film called Little Shop of Horrors. Now this is the remake from 1986. I knew from the start that this was supposed to be like that. This was a musical, but this is the major issue I have with this film. I do think the songs are really cool and really fun, but there's too many songs in this film for its own good. And usually when I look at or like when I watch musicals, I want to have a song which has something to do with the main storyline. In this one, it just feels like just random people showed up and they sang a song and then just kept going like that. So I thought that was a little bit annoying from time to time. I give this a 6 out of 10. I still think it's a good film for what it is, but I expected not that many songs shoved into a musical. I think there's way too much music shoved into this project, in my personal opinion. But the songs themselves, yeah, if I just would have listened to the songs themselves, I really like the songs, and I do like the main storyline, which was based like on the original one from the 60s by Roger Corman. But yeah, there's just too many songs in this film for my liking, in my personal opinion. But yeah, so that is the entire all of the films that I watched during the Horrorthon, and I'm just gonna say these. I'm just gonna rank the top five. I'm not gonna say anything else about these films because I already talked about these films now. So top five out of all those films that I've watched, if you don't count the ones that I've already watched before. So yeah, if you get what I mean. So number five we have Scars of Dracula. At number four we have The Others. At number three we have Terrifier 3. At number two we have Bad Ronald, and at number one we have Freaks. So all of those five films highly recommended by me. So yeah. So that's it for this video. This was like a combination of the Horrorthon thing and the top five of the month. So yeah, you kind of get like two videos into one basically. So, but anyway, I hope you enjoy this. This turned out to be really long as well for some weird reason. But yeah, that's what happens when you talk about films in general. But yeah, hope you enjoy this little video, and yeah, see you in the next one. Bye bye.